You've seen them, right? Those viral videos of just explosive public meltdowns, full of screaming and absolute chaos. But what is really going on there? Today, we are diving into the pretty controversial analysis of Dr. Hannah Spier. She makes the case that we're actually seeing a hidden epidemic of certain female personality disorders. So in this explainer, we're going to walk through her entire argument, from the diagnosis to the roots of the behavior, and why she claims it's all being swept under the rug.
The analysis kicks off with this incredibly stark statement, and it really sets the tone. Dr. Spier isn't talking about a few random, isolated incidents. She's framing this as a massive issue, one that creates what she calls wreckage in families, relationships, and workplaces.
I mean, we've all seen these clips at this point. A woman having a full-blown tantrum on an airplane, another one losing it at a graduation ceremony. The source uses these moments as a jumping-off point to ask a much, much deeper question. What is it that turns a grown adult into a screaming, sometimes even violent, public spectacle? Now, to understand this behavior, the analysis doesn't just chalk it up to a bad day or simple anger. No, it puts forward a very specific diagnostic framework, one that's rooted in what psychiatry calls cluster B personality disorders. So what in the world is cluster B? Well, it's not just one thing. As you can see, it's more like a family of related conditions, all defined by these really intense emotional swings, a flair for the dramatic, manipulation, and just pure impulsivity. Dr. Spier argues that the lines between these are often blurry, which is why it helps to think of them as a whole spectrum of related issues. Okay, to make this less abstract and more concrete, the analysis zooms right in on that now infamous video of the woman melting down on a plane. The argument is that this isn't just someone having a bad travel day, it's a textbook example of these underlying traits blowing up in real time. And here's where it all kicks off. The woman is literally grabbing her seatmate's hair, while at the same time denying that she's doing it. The source flags this as a huge indicator. It's not just the aggression, it's this profound break from reality where her words and her actions are in a completely different universe. But the analysis goes even deeper than saying she lied. It's interpreted as this potent cocktail of contempt and pure entitlement. Dr. Spier's argument even suggests there's a kind of sadistic satisfaction there, a smirk of actual pleasure that she gets from creating all this chaos. And then, the whole performance pivots on a dime. As she's being restrained, her aggressive taunts suddenly flip to these panicked cries of "I can't breathe." This is a really crucial shift in the whole dynamic. So this analysis doesn't see this as genuine distress. It sees it as a cold, calculated, manipulative strategy. It's a pivot from aggressor to victim, a way of weaponizing vulnerability to get out of trouble. You know, if rage doesn't work, maybe tears will. It's described as a pattern of behavior, one that was likely perfected over an entire lifetime. Okay, so if that's what the behavior looks like, the next obvious question is, why? Why does this happen? The argument is that these disorders don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're carefully sculpted, over years, by a very precise mix of factors. The source lays out this kind of three-part recipe. It all starts with temperament. We're talking personality traits that are 40 to 60% genetic. Then that raw material gets shaped by early attachment, especially with a mother figure, which can create these deep core wounds. And finally, it's all baked into place by an environment where these massive emotional displays are learned and even rewarded as the only way to get your needs met. Let's dig into that temperament piece for a second, because this model is fascinating. Think of it like you have two internal systems. In these individuals, the alarm system for threats is supposedly cranked up to 11, totally hyperactive. At the same time, their affiliation system for bonding and connection is underdeveloped. This creates this incredibly painful combination of constant, high anxiety and a bottomless need for attachment. All right, and now we get to the absolute central claim of this entire analysis. If so many of us recognize this behavior from our own lives, why don't the official psychiatric numbers show it? Why does it feel like an epidemic while the data says everything is basically flat? This right here, 5.9%, is the official prevalence rate for personality disorders that you'll see cited most often. But here's the real kicker. Dr. Spier points out that this number comes from research that hasn't been updated in almost 20 years, a time during which our culture has changed, well, dramatically. So the argument offers three main reasons for this huge gap between the data and reality. First, that some behaviors have just become so normal in our culture that they aren't even seen as symptoms anymore. Second, that the research itself is just plain flawed. And third, and this is the big one, that there's an ideological movement to re-diagnose this behavior as something else entirely. Let's take that first point on cultural normalization. It used to be that things like extensive tattoos might have been a little red flag for a clinician, a potential sign of impulsivity. But today, they're so common they're not considered clinically relevant at all, even though the analysis argues they might still be serving that exact same psychological purpose, a way to cope with deep emotional pain. The second argument is a direct attack on the research methods. Dr. Spier claims that the major studies are flawed because, for one, they ignore people who are just below the full diagnostic line but still cause total chaos. They also throw out anyone with overlapping substance abuse issues, which is like almost everyone in these cases. And maybe most critically, they rely on people reporting on themselves, a population that's known for manipulation and not having a ton of self-insight. And that brings us to the third, and by far the most controversial argument in the whole analysis, the idea that this disorder isn't just being missed, it's being actively erased and totally redefined. Here it is. This is the core of it. The analysis highlights a huge movement inside psychiatry to stop diagnosing borderline personality disorder, or BPD, and instead call it complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD. Now, this isn't just swapping out a few letters, it's a complete, fundamental shift in how we understand the root of the problem. And this slide lays out the difference perfectly. On the left, you've got BPD, which is understood as a personality structure. It's about the internal wiring itself. On the right, you have CPTSD, which is seen as a response to an external trauma that shatters a person. The first one implies an internal problem, while the second one places the cause entirely on the outside world. The big concern here is that by collapsing BPD into a trauma category, we risk losing sight of the traits that are really unique to the personality disorder itself. Things like that chronic, gnawing feeling of emptiness, an unstable sense of self, a clear pattern of manipulation, and what's called splitting, that tendency to see people as either all good saints or all evil demons with absolutely no gray area. So what? Why does this whole diagnostic debate really matter in the real world? Well, the source wraps up by outlining the stakes, arguing that what we call this behavior has massive consequences for everyone. This quote really gets to the absolute heart of Dr. Spier's concern. The idea is that if the behavior is seen only as a trauma response, then the person is framed only as a victim. And according to this analysis, when that happens, the very concepts of personal responsibility for your actions and accountability for the harm you cause to others can just fade away. And that leaves us with the central and pretty provocative question of this whole explainer. Is this behavior the product of a disordered personality, or is it the inevitable result of past trauma? Dr. Spier's analysis makes a strong case for the first, but the debate itself really forces a tough conversation on all of us. No matter what the cause, where does personal accountability for your actions actually begin?